The necessity of returning to Silver Bend felt like shedding a skin they had finally grown comfortable in. The quiet, self-contained world of the canyon was replaced by the clatter of the town, the noise grating on Ara's nerves and registering as a constant, confusing vibration to Lysander. They rented a small room above a baker's shop. The scent of yeast and the constant dull roar of voices downstairs were a brutal contrast to the silence of their cabin. Yet, the urgency of the legal threat was a stronger force than their aversion to noise. Their first task was finding a lawyer, and it was a demoralizing pilgrimage. The established attorneys in Silver Bend were either retained by Copperhead Consolidated or outright refused to take on such a powerful opponent. A homestead claim against a mineral claim is a losing battle, especially when the plaintiff is a mute artisan, no offense intended. One lawyer sneered, not bothering to lower his voice. Ara had to translate the cold, cruel words to Lysander via the slate. His face remained impassive, but his fingers, resting on the hilt of his belt knife, twitched minutely, a sign of the deep, silent rage she was learning to read. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly in the form of a young, ambitious legal clerk named Matthew Thorne. He was barely 23, sharp-eyed, and newly arrived from the East, eager to make a reputation. He didn't scoff at their lack of money or Lysander's muteness. He saw only the glaring injustice and the high-stakes drama of taking down a corporate bully. Mr. Blackwood, your rights as a homesteader are clearly established. We have to prove that your livelihood, your workshop, supersedes their speculative mineral claim. It won't be easy. The judge, Judge Harrington, favors established business interests. Thorne wrote quickly on a fresh ledger sheet. The key issue is that you cannot speak for yourself. The opposition will use your silence to suggest you are incapable, or worse, hiding something. The next few weeks were a crucible. Thorne coached Ara relentlessly. She became Lysander's voice, interpreter, and chief witness all at once. Every evening, back in the noisy room above the bakery, Lysander taught Ara signs with feverish intensity. Not just the casual language of home, but the legal lexicon of evidence, precedent, and objection. He couldn't hear, but he could read, and his mind, trained in engineering, grasped the intricate mechanisms of the law with fierce logic. He filled dozens of slates detailing the history of his land use, his commissions, his ledger entries, proof that his woodworking was a serious, established trade, not a hobby. The day of the trial dawned with a cold, dry wind rattling the courthouse windows. The courtroom was packed. The opposition, led by the imposing Mr. Silas Kincaid, a man whose voice boomed like an echoing cannon, looked smug. Lysander sat beside Elara at the defense table, his presence commanding despite his stillness. He wore his finest, if simple, leather coat, his hands folded in his lap, the desert sage color of his eyes fixed on the judge. Kincaid launched a verbal assault. He painted Copperhead Consolidated as the engine of progress and Lysander as an eccentric recluse squatting on valuable ground. When it came time for the defense to present, Ara stood, her knees shaking. She introduced Lysander not as a mute, but as a master craftsman whose language is wood. When Lysander was called to the stand, the tension in the room was palpable. Kincaid immediately moved to have his testimony barred. Your Honor, the witness cannot be cross-examined, cannot respond, and cannot swear the oath verbally. His reliance on a third party, Mrs. Lysander Blackwood, to interpret his written answers is hearsay and unreliable. Thorne rose swiftly. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood is a deaf man, not an incompetent one. He has full mental capacity. We propose a simple, established system. He will write his testimony on the slate. Mrs. Blackwood will read the words aloud, confirming their accuracy with the court clerk. If Mr. Kincaid objects to a word, he may immediately view the source text. This is a matter of equality before the law, not convenience. Judge Harrington, recognizing the legal and moral novelty of the situation, allowed the arrangement, but warned, "Keep the proceedings moving, Mrs. Blackwood." The next hours were exhausting. Ara had to translate Kincaid's aggressive, complex questions into simple signs or quickly written summaries on a large slate visible to Lysander. Lysander would then write his answer, sometimes a single damning sentence, sometimes a paragraph of precise detail. Kincaid tried to twist his words, suggesting Lysander had never heard or read the original land deed, but Lysander wrote, The legal description is recorded in my ledger, page 42. I used the boundary markers to confirm the corners. Ara's voice, reading these words, filled the courtroom with the quiet authority of the man who had written them. The climax came when Kincaid attacked Lysander's livelihood. "You claim this is a functioning business, Mr. Blackwood? Where are your contracts? Your clientele is tiny, rural. Your craft is merely a pastime, sir, a therapeutic distraction for a man afflicted by silence." Lysander took the slate and wrote, "Not an answer, but a question. Do you believe art is merely a distraction, Mr. Kincaid?" Kincaid scoffed. "I believe profit is the purpose of land." Lysander then wrote his final, most powerful statement, the one they had practiced for weeks. Ara read it, her voice unwavering. "Copperhead Consolidated measures value in ore and dollars. I measure value in permanence, in utility, and in connection. I have customers who depend on my craft. I pay taxes. I created this. They wish to tear it down for a gamble. The law asks what is being used for profit and purpose. I submit that a carved table, built to last 100 years and feed a family, is a more permanent and worthy use of the earth than a fleeting hole dug for metal." Then, Lysander did something entirely unplanned. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small carving he had left for Ara that night long ago. The two hands, clasped together, one large, one small. He placed it on the witness stand, next to the law books. He pointed to the carving, then to the silent courtroom, then to Ara, and finally he touched his fingers to his heart and extended his hand toward the judge, the sign for peace. The court fell into a stunned, absolute silence. It was a language they all understood, a profound, non-verbal summation of his case. His home was built on partnership, peace, and tangible creation. Judge Harrington looked at the carving, then at Lysander, then at the triumphant, tearful face of Ara. He saw not a recluse, but a man who communicated in a way that shamed the noise and greed around him. After a long, tense deliberation, the judge returned. "The court finds that the established homestead of Lysander Blackwood, evidenced by years of productive, documented business and permanent improvements, holds precedence. The claim of Copperhead Consolidated is dismissed." A roar erupted in the courtroom, quickly silenced by the gavel. Lysander looked at Ara. He signed peace again, but this time he pointed it solely to her. They had won. They had saved their home. Outside, the noise of Silver Bend no longer sounded grating. It sounded like the echo of a hard-won victory. As they packed their meager belongings to return to the canyon, Ara knew the real lesson wasn't about legal arguments or mineral rights. It was about the power of learning to listen to a new kind of voice, a voice that was clear and strong, even without sound. Part 4. The Legacy of Silence. The journey back to the cabin was filled with an exhausted, profound quiet. They didn't need to speak. The victory was a shared breath. The sight of their home, the stone and timber cabin, the wrapping porch, the familiar crooked cedar signal Lysander had been holding the day they met, was the sweetest sight Ara had ever known. They were home, safe, and their future was finally, truly theirs. The next few years settled into a rhythm far deeper and richer than their initial tentative companionship. The courtroom battle hadn't just saved their land, it had forged their bond into something unbreakable. Ara formally took on the business side of Lysander's craft. She handled commissions, negotiated prices, her courtroom negotiating skills were now sharp and unflinching, and managed the ledgers. Lysander, freed from the necessity of dealing with the noisy outside world, poured his passion into his work. His carvings became more complex, his reputation spreading far beyond Silver Bend. He didn't just carve furniture, he created stories in wood. Clients started traveling from as far as Phoenix and Tucson, drawn by the legend of the silent craftsman whose work spoke volumes. He carved the history of the desert, coyotes chasing shadows, the struggle of the mesquite tree, the stillness of the canyon, all incorporated into cabinets, desks, and benches. Ara created a catalog of his work, her careful script describing the emotional landscape of each piece. This desk, carved from reclaimed walnut, features a root structure that reminds the user that all growth must be firmly grounded in silence. The cabin, once an isolated outpost, became a quiet hub of creation. Samuel, now a young man, was promoted from helper to apprentice, spending 5 days a week learning the craft. Lysander taught him through touch, gesture, and the elegant, rapid signs he had taught Ara. Samuel, though not deaf, learned to exist in the silence, recognizing its efficiency and depth. He often served as a translator for clients, his understanding of both sound and silence bridging the two worlds. One cool autumn afternoon, years after the trial, Ara sat on the porch, watching Lysander work in the garden. He was tending the newly planted apricot tree they had placed where the desert scrub had been thickest. She felt a familiar, gentle fluttering in her belly, a life growing within her, a soundless answer to their years of quiet hope. She had known for weeks, but had been waiting for the right moment. She walked out to him, carrying his slate. He straightened up, his eyes immediately lighting on the way she held herself, the carefulness in her step. He knew before she wrote a single word. She handed him the slate. She had only drawn 2 small figures, a large hand holding a tiny closed bud. Lysander looked at the drawing, then at Ara's face, tears blurring his sage eyes. He didn't write. He took her hands, kissed her palms, and then dropped to his knees, pressing his face gently to her stomach, his large hand resting protectively over the small life beginning there. He closed his eyes, and Ara knew he was listening, not with his ears, but with his soul, to the silent, fierce promise of their future. He was listening to the most sacred sound of all, the steady beat of a new heart. The arrival of their daughter, whom they named Elara, meaning light, was the final weaving of their world. Elara did not grow up in silence. She grew up in clarity. Ara spoke to her, sang to her, filling the home with soft noise. But Lysander's language, sign and touch, was her first tongue. Elara learned to navigate both worlds effortlessly. She was a bridge, laughing out loud while simultaneously signing to her father about the quail in the yard. As she grew, Elara was fascinated by her father's work. She would sit for hours in the workshop, running her small fingers over the smooth, finished wood. Lysander began carving small, whimsical creatures just for her, a badger with a mischievous grin, a soaring hawk, a rabbit frozen mid-hop. One day when Elara was about 5, a wealthy patron from Phoenix arrived to collect a massive, custom-carved bookcase. The man, loud and impatient, spoke condescendingly to Ara, asking if Lysander was tending to his silent duties. Elara, who had been quietly playing nearby, walked up to the man. She looked him square in the eye, pointed firmly to her father, and then signed with quick, flawless grace. "My father speaks the truth. You only speak noise." The patron stared, chastened. Ara knelt beside her daughter, her heart overflowing. Elara had used the language of silence to deliver the sharpest rebuke. Lysander, seeing the exchange in his peripheral vision, turned. Ara quickly signed Elara's words to him. He smiled, a deep, joyful transformation of his features, then walked over, picked up his daughter, and held her close. His legacy was safe, secured not in a legal document, but in the eloquent hands of his child. Their life together, marked by its profound quiet, became a beacon. People came seeking not just Lysander's art, but Ara's calm advice. The silence that had once represented a void became a sanctuary. They learned that the world outside the canyon was noisy, but the world they had built was full. In the deep desert evenings, after Elara was asleep, Ara and Lysander would sit on the porch. The desert air was cool, the stars a vast, brilliant canvas. Lysander would often take the old cedar signal, the piece he had held the day Ara arrived, and trace its rough grain. He would turn to her, the line of his jaw soft in the moonlight. He would sign the words that had become their personal, unspoken vow, the words that defined everything he was and everything they had built together. "You are my peace." Ara would reach for the little sparrow, carving he had left on her pillow years ago, clutch it, and sign back, "And you are my world." They lived not in spite of the silence, but because of it. It was the space where they had listened, learned, and finally truly loved.